I know it's there. I've got to believe it because I see the reactions, I see the photographs, I see the critics and people who recognize it in the street.
Audrey Hepburn looked like she had the perfect life. Hollywood fame, timeless beauty, and a legacy that still inspires millions today. But behind that elegant image was a story filled with heartbreak, loss, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. In her final years, Audrey revealed something deeply personal, the name of the one man she never truly got over. And it wasn't one of her husbands or a famous co-star. It was someone far more unexpected. Once you understand who it was and why, you'll start to see her entire life in a completely different way. The marriage that quietly took everything from her. Most people don't think about Audrey Hepburn as someone who struggled in her personal life, but her first marriage tells a very different story. She was married to actor Mel Ferrer for 14 years. On paper, they looked like the perfect couple. Both were artistic, cultured, and deeply involved in the film industry. They met through mutual connections, specifically Gregory Peck, and their chemistry was obvious from the start. By 1954, they were married in a quiet ceremony in Switzerland. At first, things seemed to work. Ferrer played a big role in helping shape her career. Audrey was still rising in Hollywood at the time, and having someone experienced by her side felt reassuring. But over time, something shifted. What started as support slowly turned into control. Ferrer began having strong opinions about nearly everything. What roles she should take, how she should present herself, even who she should spend time with. And Audrey, despite being one of the biggest stars in the world, often went along with it. Imagine that, one of the most famous women on the planet, feeling small in her own marriage. And then came the thing she wanted most in life, children. Audrey didn't just want to be a mother, it was something she deeply longed for. But it didn't come easily. In 1955, she became pregnant and lost the baby. It was devastating. Then, a few years later, it happened again. While filming The Unforgiven, she was thrown from a horse during a scene. The accident left her injured, hospitalized, and she suffered another miscarriage. That kind of pain doesn't just go away, it stays with you. Finally, in 1960, she gave birth to her son, Sean. For a moment, it felt like everything might settle down. She stepped away from acting completely for a year just to focus on being a mother. But the marriage itself never really recovered. There were rumors, arguments, jealousy, even talk of infidelity from both sides. After 14 years, it was over. Audrey walked away emotionally drained, but also, for the first time in a long time, free. What she didn't realize yet was that the next relationship would hurt her in a completely different way. What makes this part of Audrey's life even harder to understand is how invisible it all was to the outside world. People saw the photos, the premieres, the elegant appearances, and assumed everything was fine. That's the strange thing about emotional pressure. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, gradual, almost unnoticeable until it's already taken hold. Audrey wasn't someone who liked confrontation. She didn't fight loudly or demand control back. Instead, she adapted. She adjusted herself to keep things stable, even if it meant losing parts of who she was in the process. And over time, that kind of compromise starts to feel normal. But deep down, something in her was always pulling in a different direction. You can see it in the choices she made, stepping away from acting, prioritizing motherhood, searching for something more grounded. It was like she was constantly trying to reclaim a version of life that felt real to her. And when the marriage finally ended, it wasn't just a breakup, it was a release. A quiet realization that she had been living within someone else's expectations for far too long. That kind of realization doesn't come with celebration, it comes with exhaustion and a slow process of finding yourself again. She walked away from Hollywood for the wrong man. By the late 1960s, Audrey Hepburn had reached a level of fame that very few people ever experience. She wasn't just a movie star anymore, she was a global icon. Films like Breakfast at Tiffany's, Charade, and My Fair Lady had cemented her place in history. And then, she walked away, just like that. Hollywood didn't understand it. Studios were offering her everything. Lead roles, huge paychecks, creative freedom, but Audrey had something else in mind. She wanted a normal life. More importantly, she wanted her son to have a normal childhood, something she herself never had. Around this time, she met Andrea Dotti during a cruise in the Mediterranean. And honestly, it sounded like the perfect setting for a love story. Warm evenings, open water, beautiful scenery. It almost felt like something out of a movie. Dottie was charming, easygoing, and very different from her first husband. Within 6 months, they were married. Audrey moved to Rome and fully embraced this new chapter. She stepped away from Hollywood and focused on being a wife and a mother. For a while, it seemed like she had finally found what she was looking for. But then reality hit. Dottie wasn't the man she thought he was. The affair started early, and they didn't stop. And worse, they weren't even hidden. Italian tabloids constantly reported on his behavior. The paparazzi followed everything. Audrey had left Hollywood to escape the spotlight, only to find herself in a different kind of public drama. Still, she stayed, partly for their son, Luca, who was born in 1970, and partly because Audrey wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily. But eventually, it became too much. The betrayal, the lack of privacy, the emotional toll, it all added up. When the marriage ended, she didn't make a big public statement. That wasn't her style. But those close to her said it left her more guarded than ever before. 2 marriages, 2 completely different experiences. And yet, both ended in heartbreak. Looking back, what stands out the most is how much Audrey was willing to give up for the idea of a peaceful life. She didn't just step away from acting temporarily, she walked away at the peak of her power. Very few people would ever make that kind of decision, especially in an industry where relevance disappears quickly. But for Audrey, fame had already started to feel like a trade-off. Every role, every appearance, every headline, it all came with a cost, and she had already paid that cost for years. What she wanted now was something quieter, something stable. The problem was, she trusted the wrong person to build that life with. And when that trust was broken again and again, it created a different kind of exhaustion. Not loud heartbreak, but a slow erosion of belief. The kind that makes you question your own judgment, your own instincts. By the time the marriage ended, it wasn't just about betrayal, it was about the realization that she had once again built her life around something that couldn't hold. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not just losing the relationship, but realizing how much of herself she had reshaped to make it work. The hidden pattern behind every man she chose. Here's something that often gets overlooked. Audrey Hepburn's relationship struggles didn't start with her marriages, they started when she was a child. She was born in 1929 in Brussels and grew up moving between different countries. On the surface, it looked like a privileged upbringing, travel, languages, culture, but underneath, things were falling apart. Both of her parents were involved in fascist movements during the 1930s. They supported the Nazi regime, not quietly, but openly. And then, when Audrey was just 6 years old, her father left. Just like that, he walked out on her and her mother and moved away. That moment changed everything. She later described it as the most defining emotional wound of her life. Think about that. At 6 years old, she lost the one person who was supposed to stay. And it didn't stop there. During World War II, she was sent to the Netherlands for safety, but it wasn't safe at all. Germany invaded, she lived under occupation, she hid in basements during gunfire, she changed her name to avoid being identified as English. 2 of her uncles were executed. She joined the resistance, carrying messages, helping in any way she could. At one point, she even performed ballet in secret gatherings to raise money where no one could clap because making noise could get them all killed. Then came the famine. Food was scarce. People were starving. Audrey survived by eating tulip bulbs. Her health deteriorated badly. This was the same woman who would later become one of the most admired figures in the world. But at that moment, she was just a starving teenager trying to survive. After the war, a UNICEF worker gave her a chocolate bar. She never forgot that. And when psychologists later looked at her life, many pointed to one thing: her father leaving. That one moment shaped how she saw relationships, love, and trust. It explains why she was drawn to older, authoritative men, why she stayed in relationships longer than she should have, why she kept trying to make things work, even when they clearly weren't. And years later, she found him again. Using the Red Cross, she tracked him down in Dublin. She probably imagined that reunion for years. Maybe she hoped for warmth, for closure. But when she finally saw him, he was distant, cold, unchanged. The connection she had dreamed about never happened. And yet, she forgave him. She even supported him financially for the rest of his life. That says everything you need to know about who she was. When you look at her life from a distance, the pattern becomes almost impossible to ignore. It wasn't random. It wasn't just bad luck. It was something deeper, something rooted in the way she experienced love from the very beginning. Audrey didn't just lose her father physically. She lost the sense of security that comes with knowing someone will stay. And when that happens at such a young age, it changes the way you connect with people later in life. You start to look for stability in very specific ways. You're drawn to people who feel strong, certain, in control, because they seem like the opposite of what you lost. But sometimes, those same traits come with their own problems. And without realizing it, you end up repeating the same emotional dynamic over and over again. That's what makes her story so relatable, even decades later. Because it's not just about fame or relationships, it's about how early experiences shape everything that comes after. And in Audrey's case, that early absence didn't just influence her choices, it quietly guided them. The relationship people forgot. Before her marriages, there was someone else, William Holden. They met while filming Sabrina in 1954. And this time, it was real. The chemistry wasn't just acting. Everyone on set could see it. Holden fell for her hard. He even asked her to marry him. And she said no, not because she didn't care about him, but because she wanted children, and he couldn't have them. That was it. Simple. Final. She walked away from something real because it didn't fit the future she wanted. And in a way, that decision says a lot about her. She wasn't naive, she knew what mattered to her, and she wasn't willing to compromise on it. There's something almost bittersweet about the way that relationship ended. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a quiet, logical decision that carried a lot of emotional weight underneath it. Audrey chose her future over her feelings. And while that might sound like strength, and in many ways it was, it also came with a cost. Because walking away from something real, even for the right reasons, doesn't mean it stops mattering. Moments like that stay with you. They become the what if in the back of your mind. The version of life that could have unfolded differently if just one detail had changed. And even though she moved on, built relationships, and lived an incredible life, that moment stands out as one of the few times she had something genuine and let it go anyway. Not because she didn't care, but because she cared about something else more, the quiet life and the final love. After her second divorce, Audrey didn't go back to Hollywood. Instead, she stepped away from everything. She moved to a small farmhouse in Switzerland called La Paisible, which means the peaceful one. And for the first time, she lived a truly quiet life. No red carpets, no press tours, just simple routines. Gardening, walking her dogs, cooking. Neighbors later said she was just normal. Then she met Robert Wolders. And this relationship was different. No drama, no pressure, no expectations. Just two people who had been through enough, finally finding something steady. They never officially married, but she called him her husband anyway. Because to her, the label didn't matter. What mattered was how it felt. And for over a decade, they lived together peacefully. What made this part of her life so different wasn't just the relationship, it was the absence of pressure. For the first time, Audrey wasn't trying to prove anything. Not to the public, not to a partner, not even to herself. There was no performance involved, no expectations to meet, no image to maintain. And that kind of simplicity is rare, especially for someone who had spent most of her life in the spotlight. It allowed her to slow down in a way she never had before, to actually experience life without constantly adjusting to it. The relationship with Wolders worked because it didn't demand anything beyond what was already there. It wasn't about fixing something broken, it was about appreciating what was already whole. And maybe that's why it lasted, because it wasn't built on need or expectation, it was built on understanding. The final chapter. In the late 1980s, Audrey became deeply involved with UNICEF. She traveled to some of the hardest places in the world: Ethiopia, Sudan, Bangladesh. And this wasn't just charity work, it was personal. She had lived through hunger and war herself. She understood what those children were going through. Then in 1992, she was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive cancer. She handled it the same way she handled everything else, quietly, with strength. Her only wish was to go home, and she did. She spent her final Christmas in Switzerland, surrounded by the people she loved, and in January 1993, she passed away peacefully. What stands out the most during this time isn't fear, it's clarity. Audrey seemed to understand exactly what mattered and what didn't. There was no rush to hold on to things that no longer had meaning, no attempt to rewrite the past, just a quiet acceptance of where she was. And in a way, that kind of clarity is something most people spend their entire lives trying to reach. She focused on the people around her, the relationships that were real, the moments that still carried weight. It wasn't about legacy or fame anymore, it was about presence, being there fully. And even in those final months, she carried the same sense of grace that defined her life. Not the public version of grace, but something deeper, something grounded. It wasn't about how she was seen, it was about how she chose to face the end, the one man she never got over. So after everything, after the marriages, after the heartbreak, after all the relationships, who was the one man she never truly got over? It wasn't a lover, it wasn't a husband, it was her father. The man who left when she was 6, the man who never came back, the man who never gave her the closure she needed. Even in her final years, she spoke about him. Not with anger, but with questions. Wondering if he ever felt the same loss she did, wondering if he ever thought about her. She never got those answers, but she never stopped loving him either. And maybe that's the most powerful part of her story. Because in the end, everything, her relationships, her choices, even her humanitarian work can be traced back to that one absence, that one missing piece. And maybe that's why she once said that the greatest thing you can give your children is the feeling of being loved, because she knew exactly what it felt like to grow up without it. What makes this revelation so powerful isn't just who it was, it's what it represents, because it shows that no matter how much someone achieves, no matter how far they go in life, certain emotional experiences never fully disappear. They don't fade with time, they don't get replaced by success or relationships. They stay, and in Audrey's case, that absence shaped everything. How she loved, how she forgave, how she held on to people even when they didn't give the same in return. It also explains her incredible capacity for empathy. Why she connected so deeply with children in crisis. Why she dedicated so much of her life to helping others feel seen, supported, and cared for. Because she knew exactly what it felt like to grow up without that. And maybe, in her own way, everything she did was an attempt to give others what she had spent her life searching for. Not fame, not success, but something much simpler. The feeling of being loved and knowing it would last. And what makes that even more striking is how quietly she carried it. Audrey wasn't someone who constantly spoke about pain or used it to define herself publicly. In fact, most people who admired her never saw this side of her at all. They saw elegance, kindness, and composure, but not the deeper emotional story underneath. That's what makes it so powerful, because it reminds you that even the most admired people in the world are still shaped by very human experiences. The kind that don't go away no matter how much time passes. In Audrey's life, that early loss didn't make her bitter. It made her more open, more forgiving, maybe even more willing to love than most people would be after going through the same thing. And that's rare, because for many, that kind of wound leads to walls. But for her, it led to compassion. Even when she didn't receive the love she hoped for, she kept giving it anyway. Not because it was easy, but because it was who she chose to be. Audrey Hepburn's story isn't just about Hollywood, fame, or iconic roles. It's about something much deeper. It's about how the experiences we carry shape the way we love, the choices we make, and the people we become. Her life shows that even the most graceful, admired figures have unseen struggles that define them in powerful ways. So now we want to hear from you. What do you think about Audrey's story? Did this revelation change how you see her? If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the next video. You never know what truth you'll uncover next.